evangelist, for your great presentation.
주제 발표 세 회를 들어봤습니다.
So we have listened to the 3 presentations. Thank you very much for your presentation. From now on, I'd like to invite 2 panelists. The first panelist is from Chongshin University College of Education, Professor Sohan Kim. Professor Sohan Kim is now online.
김성 교수님 반갑습니다.
Nice to meet you, Professor Kim. Nice to meet you too. I am teaching students at the College of Education at Chongshin University. I am honored to participate in this conference. And the second panelist
대구 화남 쪽
is from Daegu Hwanam Elementary School, and also he is serving as an important member of the Office of Education, Mr. Chung Seo-lee.
두분 토론자께서 입장을 하셨는데
So we have 2 panelists.
제가 한 5분 정도씩
I'd like to ask each of the panelists to make comments for about 5 minutes respectively. Could you make comments about AI educational platform? Could you share with us your idea? First of all, Professor Kim.
김상 교수님 연결-
Professor Kim, do you hear us? Yes.
예, 한 5분 정도.
Could you please spend about 5 minutes for sharing your idea on AI education platform?
예, 지금부터 5분 정도.
So for about 5 minutes, I'd like to share my idea.
저는 지금 그 서정연 교수님께서 소개를 해주신 것처럼
As Professor Seo mentioned,
특히 이제 K-12 학생들을 위한
especially
초등학교 교육, 인공지능 교육에 관련된 여러 가지 일들을
there have
하고
been
있고요.
many
특히
efforts.
최근에
I have
교육
been
플랫폼에 관한
putting
프로그램을
efforts for
수행하고
creating
있습니다.
software educational platforms for K-12 students, and I also conducted the fundamental basic study on AI education. And as Professor Stephen Seeger and the chief evangelist from AWS and the director from Microsoft Korea, thank you very much all for your presentation. It was very impressive.
초중등 교육에서 제대로 하려면 어떤 부분을 해야 되는지에 대해서 잠깐
So I'd like to explain about what we can do to provide proper AI education to Korean students. In Korea, we have computer science-based education, which is named software education, which was applied to the elementary school and middle schools recently. For middle school, students receive over 34 hours of software education, and elementary school students, they also mandatorily receive certain hours of software education. And it will not be easy for us to help students grow their computational thinking ability only through the mandatory software education courses. As Professor Stephen Singer mentioned, we need to come up with more sophisticated education curriculum and platform so that someday our students will be able to use and produce AI solutions. The Korean government's plan for AI education includes the inclusion of AI in the official curriculum of elementary school and middle school students. But one problem is that still we are lack of hours of classes, and we need to foster the competent teachers who are able to actually teach students such AI subjects. And as you know, educational systems and institutions do not change in just over a night. We have to foster the competent teachers and improve our curriculums, and we need to go through a lot of processes, and it'll take a long time. So I'd like to ask all of you. I actually want to make a request for all of you. As our speakers mentioned, If you look at the current society, if the educational divide happens, then that will have influence on the career path and the future of our students. In terms of software and AI education, we need to close the education divide. So we need to secure the proper hours of classes when we officially adopt the AI curriculum for elementary school and middle school students. As for software and AI education, basically we need computing and coding tools. So we need an AI education platform, including computation and coding tools. As Professor Stephen said, the educational AI platform must be different from industrial AI platform. We need to enhance the engagement from children, and we need to help teachers teach students in a fun and entertaining way. And also we need to provide teachers with such resources and materials. So I think we need to have more improved, upgraded AI educational platform in Korea. As you know, the logo from Simon Pepper, as well as Snap and Scratch mentioned by Professor Stephen, we have some tools developed which are at entry level. So in the case of AI educational platform, they should provide the services and functions that are tailored to the learning needs and tailored to the purpose of education. And we should make sure that the AI education does not end as one-off event. For ensuring sustainable education, we need to make efforts. We need to have cooperation between the public and private sector. And as Professor Steven mentioned, and we need to help teachers receive teachers trainings, and we need to create and enrich the community of teachers who teach students AI. Through the conference today, we are talking about the AI educational platforms, and I hope we could have further discussions and get useful ideas for our education.
Thank you, Professor, for your comment. Now we have Ms. Lee Jung-seo. So can you make a general comment? Nice to meet you. I am in the educational field teaching students about AI and software. With the AI education introduced at schools, well, I get a lot of questions. What is education on AI? So when I actually do it with students, actually they say it's so fun. So when they first learned about software, they found it very interesting, but I told them that if you learn about AI, it will be even more fun. So AI, well, it's seen with diverse views. For example, people think that just experiencing AI is learning AI as well, and using AI to teach students, like measuring their performance or helping them learn things. Well, some people say that it is also AI education. And some people say that if you learn about principles of AI, that is the AI education. And if you look into AI education platforms, there are so many different kinds. For example, there are AI programming platforms and AI principles learning platforms, and etc. But I find that the platforms that teach the principles, the basics of AI is not sufficient compared to the ones that we can practice AI. That is what I wanted to mention. And one thing to ask is, there are great platforms, overseas platforms, but they are not localized to be converted to Korean or to meet the educational system of Korea. But I think there's something that we need to work on to introduce them to the educational field of Korea. Thank you for your comment.
이 자리에 그 마이크를 쏟다고 합니다.
Here we have the distinguished guests from Microsoft and Amazon AWS. Thank you very much for introducing very good systems to us. As Mr. Lee, the teacher asked,
초중등 교과 과정이라는 게 사실은 잘
in
세팅되지
Korea,
않아요.
elementary school and middle school curriculums are not really properly defined and established. And AWS and Microsoft have good educational curriculums. Can we combine those curriculums with the regular school curriculums? That's the question many people ask. What do you think of this?
뭐 간단하게
Well, first of all, as you said, basically, that course came from the US. So compared to the educational system of Korea, it is not a perfect match. But we are just providing these tools and support technologies, but just making them to fit into the Korean education system, that is something that we need to work together with teachers of Korea. And I understand that we teach these courses not just as a regular curriculum, but as an after-school curriculum. And for middle schools and high schools, we have done some pilot programs for the science specializing schools or Meister schools. But for now, I think that collaboration with teachers is very critical for us to adjust it to meet the Korean situation.
And Professor Stephen from Germany.
스팟이 듣고 계십니까?
Professor Stephen, do you hear us clear and loud?
아, 예.
Yep, I hear you. I can hear you. Hi.
독일의 경우에
In
대해서
Can you hear me as well?
잘 들리시나요?
잘 들립니다.
Yes, we hear you
독일의
clear.
경우에 대해서도 저희들이 좀
We have some questions about the situation in Germany.
초중등
Go ahead.
컴퓨터 사이언스에 대한 교과 과정이나
So can you explain about the computer science curriculum for K-12 students in Germany and how are you teaching K-12 students AI? That's the first question. And second question is, you introduced a SNAP, the educational platform. Is the SNAP and other AI educational platforms are well combined and blended with your regular educational curriculum at schools?
Okay. I'll start off with how the education or computer science education works in Germany. So Germany consists of 16 different states and education is different for every state. So we have 16 different curricula in Germany. But for the most part, there is no artificial intelligence part in the curriculum so far. So there are plans to introduce it into the higher educations as far as we can tell. So in the higher K-12 classes, so which is actually K-13 in the state where I live. But so we're planning on integrating, or there are plans on integrating AI into that. But for now, most of it is like voluntarily done by teachers who are interested in AI. And the second question was about the tool we used in the example I showed you, Snap. And that's one of the points is I think that when we need to, or when we think about platforms or tools for AI education, we should focus on platforms that we already use. And Snap is a great example for that. So Snap is very similar to Scratch, if you don't know it, and it's a block-based language that is used throughout education in Germany. So we have those text-based Java stuff as well, but we have now a lot of teachers using Snap, and we want to make the transition easy for people using those tools like Snap and Scratch to also integrate the AI education while allowing to use or show the underlying principles in the programming tools they already use, and not use like new artificial tools which are cool to explain stuff, but which do not allow to implement your own AI algorithms like the teachable machine or stuff like that.
네, 감사합니다.
Thank you for your answer. Any other questions or comments?
연사님들께서 직접 질문을 해주셔서
So the presenters, you can also ask questions if you have. I have a question to Mr. Stefan. So you have mentioned about unplug. It is translated into Korean. Even elementary school students are learning it. So these unplugged applications are being used for elementary school students, but and also they can use robots to learn about machine learning. So if we are to teach the basics of AI to the young children, is it meaningful to use unplugged or is it more meaningful to use robots? So if there are some schools using unplugged, well, what is the main purpose of focusing on unplugged?
So I think the focus of Unplugged is to like illustrate the core principle and to leave all the stuff around that can distract you out of business. But I think there's also research showing that it doesn't matter if you start Unplugged first and then move to programming, or if you just start using a tool like those robots you mentioned. It just depends on how the teacher that integrates AI into education, into his curriculum, is like coping with the stuff. And if he's more willing to do Unplugged, that's totally fine because he's the guy teaching Unplugged. And if he's more into robots, I think he'll do robots just fine as well. So it always depends on your personal style of teaching. And if you like to illustrate those core principles with unplugged activities, you're totally fine to do that. And if you like to do it with robots, you're also totally fine to do that.
예, 아주 좋으신 말씀.
Thank you for your great answer. Teaching students about the core idea of AI is the key. And I understand that basically the concept of data and the principle of AI learning, those will be the key of the course. You have to learn that first to apply into various other fields.
이 정도쯤 돼서
Professor Lee, I have a question to you. Well, you're teaching students at school and you have used educational platforms. So when you have done that for elementary school students, do you think that they get along with it? Do you think that the difficulty level is satisfactory? Maybe it can differ for online and offline education. What do you think? Well, for software education and AI education, you have to have the machine sitting in front of you. And there are many fun factors like game factors that make students to be more interested. I have been teaching software for about 16 years to children, but when we first introduced AI education, children show more feedback because it's more related to their everyday life. For example, software programming, well, the outcome is not directly applied to your everyday life. But if you have AI speaker at home, if you learn about the principle of how it is operated, and if you understand how the face recognition in your smartphone works with this AI education, well, it's directly related to your everyday life. So students find it very interesting. And whether they understand it well or have difficulties in understanding, well, it's like opening up the black box. So when you open up the black box, you cannot understand everything, but at least you know basic things of how things work and what kind of data is needed to make it work. That is something that even elementary school students can learn and understand. So when we taught students how to operate the machine learning and ask them, how can you apply this to create something that can be useful? They said that they want to create some apps to understand the sign language. And we asked them, how would that be possible? And they said that we can teach the AI some basic sign languages and it will learn how to interpret the language. It's amazing to hear that. And in some sense, AI might sound very difficult. And many people do not understand the principle or the theory of AI. But it was quite interesting to hear that young students can understand it and follow it and approach it easily.
아닌가 하는 생각이 듭니다. 역시 플랫폼을 잘 활용을 해서
So I feel that we need to make a good use of the platform and expand the use of the platform for AI education. Then,
만든다.
if we make an AI education platform, what are your expectations
선생님 측면에서 좀
from your perspective?
Well, there are two actually. Students should be interested in trying it, some kind of platform that makes students feel interested and makes them find it fun. So they should first find it fun, and we should make them dig further. It's like a Google's quick draw. It is like a fun game following the drawing, but eventually they find it amazing how this machine is repeating what they are doing. So they open up the data set and then they can learn about it, and later they want to train the data set. So experience leading to the learning and application is something that we need for schools. So if it's just simple application or simple experience, well, that is not sufficient. So it should be encompassing everything from experiencing to actually applying it.
Professor Kim, are you still with us? Yes.
교수님께 제가 좀 말씀
I want to ask a question to Professor Kim.
국내에서 지금 개발을
In Korea, if we develop an AI education platform that
것이 굉장히 중요한
that had better be connected to the curriculum of K-12 regular curriculum, so could you make any suggestions or proposals?
예, 그 한국에는 아시는 것처럼
As you know, in Korea, we have national educational curriculum which applies to all students.
2020년에 인공지능
In 2022, if we officially adopt AI as a curriculum in the regular national curriculum, then we expect that the AI education will be conducted in connection with the regular software education. Then what will be the procedures for teachers to teach students about AI, and what kind of tools do we need to use to deliver more in-depth, profound knowledge of AI to our students? And the education must also include actual practice and experience-based programs. I think the AI platform developers, education platform developers need to consider this. And we need to be careful not to use the industrial AI platform data, but we need a separate data set tailored to the educational AI platform. Because if our purpose is to teach students, we need a different set of data.
아니면 바이어스된 데이터들을 모으면
Sometimes, if we collect biased data, that will not really work well for the purpose of education. So I think we need to secure a good quality data set for the purpose of education.
데이터들을
And we also need to collect real-life data and use it for developing educational AI platform.
쓰면 좋겠다라는
So I hope that we could have such an AI educational platform. One more question. Now,
변화가 지금 일어나고
there have been changes in the education at universities.
있어서 다 인공지능
Regardless of the major,
교과가
many courses are now being converged with AI
기본적으로
and digital skills. And basically, in order to apply AI, what is the most basic concept? Data and algorithm.
굉장히 중요하거든요.
So data and algorithm are very important concepts. If students do not really know about data and algorithm, and if they learn about AI education at college, then they will find it very difficult to understand what the professor is saying. So in many cases, we see that college students learn programming, although they took the classes for AI. So if we prepare the AI education in the curriculum for K-12, that what will be the direction, what will be the desirable direction for developing the AI curriculum for the K-12.
저희가 아시는 것처럼 정보라는
As you
정보가
know,
있습니다.
we have subject named information. In the subject named information, we teach students programming. We foster their basic programming competencies, and we hope that through the curriculum, students will be able to create an AI solution. And AI is one of the subjects reflected in the high school curriculum. So we hope that inside the national regular curriculum, we need to develop a curriculum that could actually help students continue their learning about AI from K-12 through to the college education. AI is not a totally new education, but we need to find a relevance between the AI education and the existing software and information education. And we need to establish a systematic curriculum so that we can effectively teach students AI.
아까 우리 마이크로소프트나
Thank you. So we had presenters from Microsoft and Amazon talking about your platforms, and I understand that you have good computational thinking education in those platforms. And do you have a good curriculum for computational thinking and critical thinking for elementary school students as well? Well, we don't call it as a curriculum actually. It's not an AI course, but it's like a future-ready skill. And in the basis, of course, we start with digital literacy and computational thinking and its definition and how to implement it. Those are the prerequisite courses. Thank you for the answer. So Mr. Lee mentioned that AI, there are many examples of AI in our everyday life, and it's a good source or good tool to make students very intrigued. What is very important for students is to feel interested and to feel curious. They want to find out how things work. So making students feel curious would be your biggest task as a teacher. And these days, we have AI applied in every field, and that is making students feel curious about those things. Well, we say that children give up on math easily. So we find many students who feel fearsome about math. But if they feel curious about certain problems, then we can see them more persistently trying to solve the problem. So with AI and software, it can sound like something very specialized and difficult to learn, but we shouldn't do that. We should make students feel interested and curious, and it can be used as a good educational tool to help students learn even very difficult subjects. And if we develop this properly, well, it will not just end with AI education, but extend to other subjects like software education, language, science, math, and sociology and history and etc. We can converge those subjects with AI to make students feel more curious about learning those subjects. Thank you for sharing your time despite your busy schedule, and thank you for your valuable comments. Professor Stefan and Professor Kim Soo-hwan, thank you for joining us online.
Thank you for having us.
오케이.
예, 감사합니다.
감사합니다. 이것으로써
So here we can conclude our session on AI education platform. Thank you for joining us.